The sky above New Geneva burned with colors that had no name in human languages. Captain Vex Corin stood on the observation deck of the orbital station Meridian's Edge, watching his homeworld die beneath curtains of violet fire. The Zalvan Empire had come, as the whispers had warned, but humanity had not listened until the silence became deafening. "Evacuation pods away, Captain," Lieutenant Sarah Vaughn reported, her voice mechanical with forced composure. 12,000 souls. That's all we could save. 12,000 from a population of 9 billion. The numbers carved themselves into Vex's mind like epitaphs. Below, the great cities of Earth's first colony world flickered and went dark, one by one, consumed by weapons that turned atmosphere itself into poison. The Zalvan did not conquer. They erased. Vex was 32 years old, a career officer who had spent his life preparing for conflicts between human factions, border disputes, the occasional pirate raid. Nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could have. "Sir, incoming transmission," Sarah said. It's Admiral Cross. From Earth." The holographic projection materialized, flickering with interference. Admiral Thane Cross looked like he had aged 20 years in the past 20 hours. His uniform was scorched and blood marked his temple. "Vex, listen to me," Cross said without preamble. "Earth is lost. Mars is lost. Titan Station fell 6 hours ago. The Zalvan fleet is moving through our space like a scythe through wheat. Where do we go?" Vex asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "Nowhere is safe. But you run anyway. You run, you hide, you survive." Cross leaned closer to the camera, his eyes fierce despite the exhaustion. "And one day, Vex, one day you make them remember why humans became the apex predator on their own world. Do you understand me?" Vex nodded slowly. "I understand." "Good. I'm transmitting coordinates to a deep space cache. It contains something we've been building. Something they don't know about." The transmission crackled. "Don't let humanity die as quietly as they expect. We're survivors, Vex. It's coded into our very DNA." The hologram dissolved into static. Behind Vex, the bridge crew sat in stunned silence. Sarah's hands trembled over her console. Young Ensign Drake Helm had tears streaming down his face. They were military personnel, trained and disciplined, but they were also human, and they had just watched everything they knew turn to ash. "Set course for the coordinates," Vex said quietly. "Best possible speed." "Sir," Sarah ventured, "what about the other colonies? Shouldn't we try to warn them? The Zalvan move faster than light itself with that cursed drive technology of theirs. By the time we reach anyone, they'll already be gone." He turned to face his crew. "We can't save the dead. But we can avenge them." The Meridian's Edge turned away from the burning world, its engines flaring to life. Behind them, New Geneva's death screams faded into the void. 3 days later, they reached the coordinates deep in the Corvash Nebula, a place where sensors turned unreliable and even light seemed uncertain of its path. There, hidden within the gas clouds, they found it, a massive cylindrical structure, unmarked and ancient-looking despite being newly constructed. "What is it?" Drake asked as they maneuvered closer. "Our Birthright," Vex said, reading the authentication codes that had appeared on his personal terminal. "The Ashbourne Initiative." The facility was automated, its AI core activating as they docked. Holographic interfaces bloomed throughout the station, revealing something that made even Vex's hardened military mind real. Genetic laboratories. Augmentation chambers. Weapons that bent the laws of physics. And at the center of it all, a message from Admiral Cross, recorded before Earth's fall. "If you're watching this, humanity has fallen," the recording began. "The Zalvan came because we were weak. Divided. Too content in our slow expansion across a few dozen worlds. They are an empire of 10,000 systems, and they saw us as nothing more than an infestation to be sterilized." Cross's image paced through the recording, his face grave. "But they made a mistake. They assumed we would break. That we would scatter and hide and eventually fade away. They don't understand what it means to be human. To be the descendants of survivors who crawled out of caves and built civilizations. Who survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have ended us." The recording paused and Cross looked directly into the camera. "This facility contains the tools to rebuild. Not the humanity we were, but the humanity we need to become. Stronger. Faster. Enhanced by technology that walks the line between human and something more. Some will call it monstrous. I call it necessary. The Zalvan believe in purity. They are a race unchanged for millennia, proud of their stagnation. Show them what evolution truly means. Show them what happens when you push humanity to adapt." The recording ended. Vex stood in the silence that followed, his crew gathered around him. On the screens surrounding them, data scrolled past in endless streams. Genetic modifications that would grant enhanced strength, speed, reflexes. Neural implants that would allow humans to interface directly with weapons systems. Organic armor that would bond with human flesh. Technologies salvaged and reverse-engineered from a dozen alien civilizations humanity had encountered peacefully over the centuries. They wanted us to become monsters, Sarah whispered. No, Vex corrected. They wanted us to become apex predators again. There's a difference. He pulled up a manifest of the facility's capabilities. It could support 50,000 people. They had 12,000 refugees in their evacuation fleet. Begin the awakening protocols, Vex ordered. Every volunteer who's willing. We'll need soldiers, engineers, pilots. We'll need people willing to change themselves for the survival of our species. And if they refuse? Drake asked. Then they stay human as we've always been, and they help support those of us who choose differently. Vex looked at his reflection in the darkened screen, seeing the man he was and imagining the weapon he would become. Freedom of choice dies when the species dies. We do what we must. Over the next weeks, the Ashbourne Initiative began its dark work. Volunteers entered the augmentation chambers and emerged changed. Vex was among the first, feeling his body reshape itself according to designs coded by Earth's finest geneticists. His bones strengthened with metallic compounds that made them nearly unbreakable. His muscles rewove themselves into something denser, more efficient. His nervous system interfaced with quantum processors that granted him reaction speeds no natural human could achieve. The pain was indescribable. The necessity was absolute. Sarah followed him into the chambers, then Drake, then hundreds of others. Some did not survive the process. Their bodies rejected the changes, unable to adapt. Each death was mourned, each sacrifice noted. But those who emerged were no longer simply human. They were Ashbourne, forged in the fires of their species near extinction. As Vex tested his new capabilities in the training halls, moving with impossible speed and striking with enough force to dent reinforced steel, he thought about the Zalvan Empire. They had crushed humanity expecting to meet sheep. They were about to encounter wolves. 6 months after the fall of Earth, the Zalvan Empire received its first hint that humanity had not died as quietly as expected. The mining colony on Varesh 7 simply stopped transmitting. For 3 days, orbital scans showed normal operations. Then silence. When the Zalvan garrison ships arrived to investigate, they found the entire facility offline, its 3,000 personnel missing, and scrawled across the command center's main display in their own language. A single word. Ashbourne. High Commander Zelthrax received the report in his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, a vessel so massive it had its own gravitational field. He was 600 years old, ancient even by Zalvan standards, and had overseen the subjugation of 47 species. None had ever struck back after their homeworld fell. Remnants, he said dismissively to his subordinate, Commander Vuarin. Desperate survivors attempting to inflict minor damages before their inevitable extinction. The missing personnel, High Commander? Vuarin asked. She was young, only 2 centuries old, and still prone to excessive concern. Debt, obviously. Humans are known for their vindictive nature when cornered. Zelthrax waved a clawed hand. Increase patrols in that sector. These ghosts will reveal themselves eventually, and we will snuff them out. But the disappearances continued. A research station near the Corvin Expanse. A fuel depot on the edge of Zalvan space. A diplomatic courier between allied systems. Each time the same pattern. No distress call, no visible attack, just absence where presence should be. And always that word, Ashbourne. Vex stood in the tactical center of their new home, a station they had named Pyre's Reach, watching the holographic display of Zalvan territory. Red markers indicated their successful operations. There were now 17. We're becoming a ghost story, Sarah said, standing beside him. Her augmentations had taken a different path than his, enhancing her neural processing and sensory capabilities. She could see in spectrums that would blind a natural human and calculate trajectories faster than most computers. They're starting to hunt for us. Good, Vex replied. Let them waste resources chasing shadows. Every ship they divert to hunt us is one less ship attacking what's left of humanity. The survivors had scattered after Earth's fall, refugees fleeing to the edges of known space. Small pockets of humanity clung to life in forgotten systems, asteroid bases, even generation ships drifting between stars. The Ashbourne had made it their mission to protect these fragments while simultaneously bleeding the Zalvan Empire. Next target? Drake asked. He had become their infiltration specialist, his augmentations granting him the ability to mimic Zalvan biosignatures well enough to fool their security systems at a distance. Vex highlighted a location on the map. Supply Depot Theta 9. It feeds 3 garrison fleets. If we take it out, we create a logistics nightmare across 4 sectors. Defenses? Sarah asked. Heavy but predictable. They still think in terms of conventional warfare. Vex smiled, though the expression held no warmth. They don't understand asymmetric combat. They've never had to. The Ashborn had learned quickly that they could not fight the Zalvan Empire directly. The Empire controlled thousands of systems with millions of ships. But empires, even the mighty ones, had vulnerabilities. Supply lines. Communication relays. The assumption of safety deep within their own territory. Humanity had spent centuries studying military history, learning from their own countless conflicts. Now they applied those lessons with surgical precision. The operation against Theta 9 began with Drake slipping through their security net, his biosignature reading as a Zalvan maintenance worker. He planted the devices personally, microscopic charges that would go undetected by standard scans. 3 days later, when the depot's fuel reserves reached critical mass from a carefully orchestrated cascade failure, the explosion could be seen from 3 systems away. The Ashborn were already gone, vanishing into the dark like smoke. But the Zalvan were learning. After Theta 9, Commander Viwarnen proposed a new strategy to High Commander Zelthrax. They are using our own tactics against us, she explained, displaying analysis of the attacks. Hit and run. Sabotage. Psychological warfare. These are techniques of the weak attempting to fight the strong. Then we eliminate their ability to hide, Zelthrax decided. Deploy sensor networks throughout the targeted sectors. If these Ashborn are using ships, they must refuel, resupply. Find their base and we will end this irritation. The sensor networks went active within a week, a web of detection that began to map every object larger than an escape pod throughout a dozen sectors. Vex received the intelligence from one of their deep cover surveillance drones. They're adapting faster than we expected, he said during the command briefing. If they find Pyre's reach, we lose everything we've built. Then we don't let them find us, Sarah said. And we make them regret looking. How? Drake asked. Vex studied the sensor network's layout, his augmented mind processing possibilities at impossible speeds. Then he smiled. We use their own net against them. Every sensor is a node. Every node is a potential weapon. We turned their security system into the galaxy's largest bomb. It took 3 weeks of preparation. The Ashborn infiltrated 6 key sensor hubs, planting code that would remain dormant until activated. The Zalvan never noticed the intrusion, their attention focused outward, searching for ships and bases. They never considered that the enemy might already be inside. When Vex triggered the code, the sensor network did exactly what it was designed to do. It transmitted data. But instead of normal scan results, each node broadcast a signal so powerful it overloaded every receiver within range. The feedback cascade spread through the network like fire through dry grass. In 17 minutes, the Zalvan lost their eyes and ears across 3 entire sectors. High Commander Zelthrax stared at the reports in disbelief. This is impossible. No species possesses this level of technical sophistication combined with such audacity. The humans were known for their creativity in warfare, Viwarnen reminded him carefully. Before we destroyed them. We did destroy them, Zelthrax insisted. These are merely the death spasms of an extinct race. But doubt had begun to creep into his certainty. The Zalvan had ruled for millennia through overwhelming force and the confidence that their technology was superior. The Ashborn were proving that technology meant nothing without the will to use it cleverly. Back at Pyre's reach, the Ashborn celebrated their victory quietly. Every success was tempered by the knowledge that billions of humans had already died, that Earth itself was a poisoned wasteland. Vex stood alone in his quarters, looking at a holographic image of Earth as it had been. Blue and green and beautiful. He had never actually been to humanity's homeworld. He was second-generation colonial, born on New Geneva under alien skies. But Earth was still home. Would always be home. And its death was a wound that would never heal. We're making them hurt, Sarah said, entering without knocking. They had known each other long enough that formality had long since faded. That has to count for something. It's not enough, Vex said. We're mosquitoes biting an elephant. Annoying, maybe even painful, but not fatal. Then we need to become something bigger than mosquitoes. Sarah pulled up new intelligence on her personal display. I've been analyzing their fleet movements, their industrial output, their political structure. The Zalvan Empire is vast, yes, but it's also bureaucratic, slow, resistant to change. So we don't just hurt them. We make them afraid. Fear is the mind killer, as the old texts say. An empire that rules through absolute confidence in its superiority cannot function if that confidence shatters. Vex looked at her, seeing the fierce intelligence that had made her invaluable. What do you have in mind? We stop hiding that we exist. We start showing them what we've become. She smiled, sharp as a blade. The Zalvan believe they are the apex species in this galaxy. Let's teach them what it means to face a race that actually fought its way to the top of the food chain. They'll come at us with everything they have. I'm counting on it. Vex considered this, his augmented mind running through scenarios and probabilities. It was a dangerous gamble. But staying in the shadows forever was simply waiting to die slowly. Draft a message, he said finally. Let's introduce ourselves properly. The message was broadcast across every Zalvan frequency simultaneously. It showed Vex's face, scarred and enhanced, unmistakably human but also unmistakably dangerous. I am Captain Vex Corrin of the Ashborn. You know us as ghosts, as terrorists, as the remnants of a species you thought you destroyed. But we are still here. We are stronger than before. And we will never stop until every human death is answered. You came to our worlds thinking we would be easy prey. You burned our homeworld thinking we would break. You were wrong. Humans do not break. We adapt. We survive. We remember. This is not a war you can win through superior numbers or technology. This is a war of will, and we have nothing left to lose. Every day you rule, we will be there. Every world you hold, we will threaten. Every ship you send, we will hunt. You wanted to erase humanity from the galaxy. Instead, you created something worse than you can imagine. You created the Ashborn. And we are coming. The message ended. Across the Zalvan Empire, in command centers and flagships and imperial halls, the same realization began to dawn. They had not destroyed humanity. They had simply made it angrier. The message changed everything. Within days, the Ashborn went from mysterious attackers to the most wanted faction in Zalvan space. Bounties were posted. Fleets were mobilized. High Commander Zelthrax himself took personal command of the eradication effort. But hunting the Ashborn proved more difficult than anticipated. They moved like water, flowing through gaps in patrol routes, striking where defenses were weakest, vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. More importantly, they began to recruit. Vex stood before a crowd of 300 survivors, refugees who had been hiding in an abandoned mining complex in the outer reach. They were gaunt, traumatized, barely clinging to life. When the Ashborn had found them, many had been too weak to even stand. We can offer you two paths, Vex said, his voice carrying through the repurposed cargo bay they had converted into an assembly hall. The first is safety. We have hidden colonies, places where you can live out your lives in peace, far from Zalvan patrols. You'll be protected, fed, given the chance to rebuild something normal. He paused, letting that sink in. Many faces showed desperate hope. The second path is harder. The second path is transformation. Join us. Become Ashborn. Trade your human limitations for enhanced capabilities. Trade safety for the chance to fight back. His eyes scanned the crowd. I will not lie to you. The process is painful. Some do not survive it. And those who do will never be fully human again. A woman near the front raised her hand. She looked to be in her 40s, though trauma had aged her. Why should we become monsters to fight monsters? Because fighting back means being strong enough to win, Vex answered honestly. The Zalvan are biologically superior to baseline humans in almost every way. Stronger, faster, tougher. Their technology is centuries ahead of what we had. If we face them as we are, we lose. If we evolve, we have a chance. But what do we become? Someone else called out. If we change ourselves so much, are we still human? Sarah stepped forward. I asked myself that question when I went into the augmentation chamber. I came out able to see in 16 different spectrums, to calculate trajectories that would take a computer minutes to process, to interface directly with any digital system. Am I still human? She touched her chest. I still fear. I still hope. I still rage at what was taken from us. Those things define humanity more than the shape of our bones or the limits of our eyes. Drake added his voice. I can mimic alien biosignatures. I can survive in environments that would kill a normal human in seconds. My body is part organic, part synthetic. But I still remember my mother's face when New Geneva burned. I still dream of the home I lost. The augmentations enhanced what I was. They didn't erase it. The crowd murmured, discussing in low voices. Vex let them talk. This choice had to be theirs, made freely or it meant nothing. Finally, the woman who had first spoken stood. How many of you were there? Originally? 12,000 refugees, Vex said. 5,000 volunteered for augmentation. 4,000 survived the process. We are now 6,000 strong, including later recruits. And you've hurt them? The Zalvan? We've destroyed 17 installations, captured or killed over 50,000 of their personnel, and disrupted operations across dozens of sectors. Vex's voice hardened. But it's not enough. It will never be enough until they pay for every human life they took. The woman nodded slowly. Then I volunteer. If there's even a chance I can make them suffer a fraction of what they made us suffer, I'll take it. Others began to stand. Not all, but more than half. Some would choose safety, and that was fine. Humanity needed survivors of all kinds. But those who stood would become something new. The augmentation process had improved since the early days at Pyre's Reach. Survival rates now exceeded 90%, and the procedure was faster, more refined. But it was still agony, still a fundamental rewriting of human biology. Vex watched each volunteer enter the chambers, seeing his own past reflected in their determined faces. The pain they would experience was necessary. Evolution had always been painful. Not everyone agreed with the Ashbourne approach. Among the refugee populations they had rescued, a faction had emerged that called themselves the Keepers. They argued for preserving humanity as it had been, untouched by augmentation. Their leader was a woman named Lissa Thorne, a former philosopher from Mars. She sought out Vex one day in his quarters, her face grave. "You're creating a subspecies," she said without preamble. "Homo superior to baseline humanity's Homo sapiens. You know where that leads." "I know where extinction leads," Vex replied. "We're already there. But at what cost? When this war ends, if we win, what happens? Do the augmented rule over the unaugmented? Do we split into two species, one destined to replace the other?" Vex had wrestled with these questions himself, in the quiet moments between operations. "Then help us ensure it doesn't happen. Join the Leadership Council. Represent the Keepers. Make sure the voice of baseline humanity is heard." Lissa studied him carefully. "You'd give us that kind of power? Even though we oppose your methods. Democracy dies when we stop listening to opposing views. Humanity dies when we forget what makes us human in the first place." Vex gestured to a chair. "Sit. Let's talk about what comes after if we survive long enough to see it." They talked for hours, debating the ethics of enhancement, the definition of humanity, the shape of any future they might build. No easy answers emerged, but the conversation itself mattered. It meant humanity was still thinking, still questioning, still maintaining the philosophical traditions that had defined them for millennia. Meanwhile, the war intensified. The Zalvan had begun adapting their own tactics, implementing irregular patrol patterns, hardening their facilities against infiltration, training specialized units specifically to hunt the Ashbourne. One of these units, led by a Zalvan warrior named Kraith, came dangerously close to finding Pyre's Reach. They tracked an Ashbourne supply run through 3 systems, nearly catching the ship before it could jump to safety. "They're learning," Sarah reported during the daily briefing. "Their response times are improving. Their security is tightening. Eventually they'll catch one of our teams. Then we need to raise the stakes," Vex said. "Show them that adapting defensively isn't enough." He pulled up a star map, highlighting a system deep in Zalvan territory. "This is Velker Prime, one of their major industrial worlds. It produces 30% of their fleet components. It's also heavily defended, considered untouchable." The room went silent. "You want to attack Velker Prime?" Drake said slowly. "That's not a raid. That's a declaration of all-out war." "We're already at war," Vex reminded him. "We've just been fighting it in the shadows. It's time to bring the fight into the light." Planning the Velker Prime operation took 3 months. They needed intelligence on every defense platform, every patrol schedule, every possible escape route. Sarah coordinated the reconnaissance, using long-range drones and deep-cover surveillance to build a complete picture. What they discovered was daunting. Velker Prime was protected by 3 orbital defense stations, each capable of destroying a capital ship. Its surface was dotted with anti-air batteries. A garrison fleet of 50 warships patrolled the system constantly. "It's suicide," one of the newer Ashbourne commanders said. "No," Vex corrected. "It's evolution. We adapt or we die. This is us adapting." The plan they developed was complex, multi-layered, and depended on perfect timing. They would need to disable the defense stations simultaneously, draw off the garrison fleet with a feint in an adjacent system, and strike the industrial complexes before reinforcements could arrive. It would require every Ashborn they had, and even then casualties would be high. Lissa Thorne came to see Vex the night before the operation. "This is madness," she said. "You'll get your people killed." "Probably some of them," Vex agreed. "But if we succeed, we prove that the Zalvan are not invincible. We inspire every other conquered species in their empire to resist. We change the entire dynamic of this war. And if you fail? Then at least we'll die fighting instead of hiding." He looked at her directly. "I know you disagree with augmentation. But can you disagree with refusing to surrender?" Lissa was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said. "I can't. But Vex, please remember that those augmented bodies still contain human souls. Don't throw them away carelessly." "Every loss wounds me," Vex said softly. "But we're already wounded. The question is whether we die from those wounds or fight through them." The operation launched at dawn Velker prime time. The Ashborn had split into 6 teams, each with a specific objective. Vex led the primary strike force himself, 500 Ashborn on 20 ships. They emerged from FTL at the edge of the system, cloaked by experimental stealth technology reverse-engineered from salvaged alien tech. The garrison fleet was moving to intercept the feint in the next system over, leaving only the defense stations and surface batteries. "Phase 1, Vex commanded. "Light them up." What happened next was a ballet of precision violence. Drake's team had infiltrated the defense stations weeks earlier, planting viruses in their systems. At Vex's signal, the viruses activated, causing targeting malfunctions and communication breakdowns. In that moment of confusion, the Ashborn struck. Their ships were small, agile, armed with weapons that punched far above their weight class. They danced through the defensive fire, losing some craft but pushing through. Vex's ship landed on the surface near the largest industrial complex. They had 5 minutes before the garrison fleet could return, 10 before orbital bombardment would become viable. "Move," he commanded. The Ashborn poured out, enhanced soldiers moving with inhuman speed. They breached the facility's walls, fought through automated defenses and Zalvan security forces. Vex himself led the charge, his augmented strength allowing him to tear through barriers that would have stopped a normal human. They planted charges throughout the complex, precision demolitions that would cripple but not completely destroy. The goal was not genocide but to send a message. 4 minutes in, they began the withdrawal. Sarah's voice crackled over the comm, "Garrison fleet returning. 2 minutes to weapons range. All teams exfiltration now," Vex ordered. They made it back to their ships with 30 seconds to spare. As they lifted off, the charges detonated, and the industrial complex collapsed in a series of carefully controlled explosions. The Ashborn ships jumped to FTL just as the garrison fleet arrived, vanishing into the void. Behind them Velker Prime burned. Not destroyed but hurt. Badly hurt. And across the Zalvan Empire people began to whisper. If Velker Prime could fall, nowhere was safe. The Ashborn were not terrorists or ghosts. They were something far more dangerous. They were proof that humanity refused to die. The attack on Velker Prime rippled through the galaxy like a shockwave. For the Zalvan Empire, it was the equivalent of someone breaking into their home and smashing their most prized possessions. For the remnants of humanity scattered across the void, it was a beacon of hope. But for the Ashborn themselves, it was the beginning of a much darker chapter. High Commander Zelthrax convened an emergency session of the Imperial Council. The holographic projections of the Empire's most powerful leaders filled the throne room of the Eternal Dominion, their alien faces showing various degrees of concern and anger. "This insult cannot stand," declared Council Member Thrax, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "The humans have proven themselves more resilient than anticipated. We must deploy the Purge fleets." The Purge fleets. Even among the Zalvan, they were spoken of with grim respect. Massive armadas designed not to conquer but to sterilize. They had been used only twice in Zalvan history, against species that had proven too dangerous to allow existence. "The cost would be enormous," another council member objected. "The Purge fleets require resources we need for maintaining our other territorial claims. The cost of not deploying them may be our empire itself," Zelthrax said coldly. "The humans have demonstrated that conventional military doctrine is insufficient. They do not fight as civilized species fight. They fight like the savages they are, striking from shadows, refusing honorable engagement." He gestured, and footage from Velker Prime played across the chamber. Ashborn soldiers moving with impossible speed, tearing through defenses, vanishing before retaliation was possible. They have also proven, Zelthrax continued, that they are willing to modify themselves. To abandon their own biological purity in pursuit of martial effectiveness. This makes them unpredictable. Evolution is supposed to take millennia, not months. They are forcing their own transformation and we cannot predict what they will become. The council deliberated for hours. In the end, the decision was unanimous. The purge fleets would be authorized, but with a specific directive: find and destroy the Ashborn's main base. Cut the head from the serpent and the body would wither. Commander Vyrn received the orders personally. You will lead the third purge fleet, Zelthrax told her. Your target is not scattered refugees. It is the Ashborn themselves. Find them. Eradicate them. Show no mercy. Vyrn accepted the command with the traditional salute, but privately she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her thoughts. It took her several moments to identify the emotion: respect. The humans had proven themselves worthy adversaries, something she had never expected to think about a supposedly inferior species. But respect did not mean mercy. It simply meant she would not underestimate them. Back at Pyre's Reach, the Ashborn were dealing with the aftermath of their victory. 23 soldiers had died at Velker Prime. Each loss was mourned, their names added to the memorial wall in the station's central hub. Vex stood before that wall, reading the names silently. He knew most of them personally. Some had been with him since New Geneva's fall. Others were newer recruits, barely finished with their augmentation before being thrown into combat. You're taking it personally, Sarah said, joining him. How can I not? Every one of them trusted me to lead them. Trusted that the plan would work, that the mission was worth the cost. And it was. Velker Prime's industrial output is crippled. We've proven the Zalvan can be hurt in their own territory. Recruitment among the refugee populations has tripled. Sarah touched his shoulder. You gave them a purpose beyond just surviving. That means something. Does it mean enough to justify their deaths? That's a question only they could answer, and they answered it by volunteering. Vex knew she was right, but the weight remained. Command was a burden he had never asked for but couldn't put down. Too many people depended on him. Too much was at stake. The celebration of Velker Prime's success lasted exactly 3 days. Then the intelligence came in. Multiple Zalvan fleet movements, the sensor analyst reported during the morning briefing. Large-scale, coordinated. They're mobilizing something big. Sarah pulled up the data, her enhanced neural processing parsing the information instantly. It's a purge fleet. They're coming for us. The room went silent. Everyone knew what a purge fleet meant. These were not garrison forces or patrol ships. These were specialized extinction units, designed to wipe entire civilizations from existence. Can we relocate? Drake asked. Find another base? Not without leaving a trail they could follow, Sarah said. We've spent a year building Pyre's Reach, establishing supply lines, creating infrastructure. If we abandon it, we abandon half of our operational capability. Then we fight, Vex said. Against a purge fleet? Someone objected. That's not a battle. That's mass suicide. Maybe, Vex acknowledged. But we've proven we don't have to fight their way. We've been playing by rules they understand. Stealth, raids, hit and run. They're bringing a fleet designed to crush conventional resistance. So we don't give them conventional resistance. He began outlining a plan so audacious it bordered on insanity. They would not evacuate Pyre's Reach. They would turn it into a trap. Over the next weeks, the Ashborn worked frantically. They rigged the entire station with explosives, prepared escape routes through the nebula's densest regions, and set up decoy signatures that would make it appear the base was more populated than it actually was. Most importantly, they began evacuating non-essential personnel. The keepers, the children, anyone who couldn't or wouldn't fight, were sent to hidden colonies far from the coming battle. Lissa Thorne protested, wanting to stay and document what happened. If we all die here, someone needs to remember, Vex told her. Someone needs to carry the story forward. That's your role now. Lissa left with tears in her eyes, promising to ensure their sacrifice would not be forgotten. When the Purge fleet arrived, it was a sight that would have broken lesser wills. 300 warships, each a leviathan of destruction. They emerged from FTL in perfect formation, their weapons already charging. Commander Vyrn stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Inexorable Truth, studying the sensor readings. The nebula was making scans difficult, but they had definitely located an artificial structure. This is Commander Vyrn of the Zalvan Empire, she broadcast on all frequencies. To the humans who call themselves Ashborn, you have proven yourselves worthy opponents. But this ends now. Surrender and you will be given quick deaths. Resist and we will make your final moments last forever. The response came from Vex himself, his image appearing on every Zalvan screen. Commander Vyrn, is it? I appreciate the offer. But humans have a saying, give me liberty or give me death. We choose death. Come and take us. Vyrn nodded slowly. She had expected nothing less. Begin the assault. The Purge fleet moved forward, weapons unleashing torrents of fire into the nebula. Energy beams and missiles carved through the gas clouds, targeting the station's location. But something was wrong. The station wasn't fighting back. It was just sitting there taking hit after hit. Commander, her tactical officer said, sensor readings are inconsistent. The station is showing damage, but the energy signatures are not matching expected patterns. Vyrn's eyes narrowed. Pull back. All ships pull. The nebula itself exploded. The Ashborn had spent weeks seeding the gas clouds with explosive compounds, turning the entire region into a massive bomb. When Vex triggered the detonation, the blast was visible from 3 systems away. The Purge fleet, caught in the heart of the explosion, was devastated. Ships were torn apart, their shields overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the blast. Of the 300 warships, fewer than 50 survived intact. And in the chaos the Ashborn struck. They had hidden their ships in the debris field around the nebula, powered down and invisible to sensors. Now they activated, swarming the surviving Zalvan vessels like piranhas. Vex led the assault personally, his ship dancing through the battle space, targeting command bridges and engine cores. His augmented reflexes made him faster than any Zalvan pilot, his enhanced strategic thinking allowing him to predict their moves before they made them. It was not a battle. It was a massacre. Commander Vyrn's ship was one of the few still fighting. She watched in horror as her fleet was torn apart by an enemy that should have been helpless. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. The Purge fleet was supposed to be invincible. All ships, emergency jump, she commanded. Retreat. Now. The survivors scattered, jumping to FTL in random directions. The Ashborn did not pursue. They had made their point. Pyre's reach was gone, destroyed in the blast. But the Ashborn had already evacuated everything that mattered. And they had just destroyed most of a Purge fleet. The message was clear, humanity could not be erased. Not anymore. But the victory came with a cost that went beyond the destroyed station. Among the Ashborn, a troubling philosophy had begun to take root. They had won by being willing to sacrifice everything. By being more ruthless than their enemies. By embracing the monster they needed to become. Drake voiced the concern during a private meeting with Vex. Sir, some of the newer recruits are talking about going further. About not just fighting the Zalvan military but targeting their civilians. Making them feel the same terror we felt. Vex felt something cold settle in his chest. That would make us no better than them. Would it? They wiped out billions of our civilians. Why shouldn't we respond in kind? Because if we become like them then they've already won. They've turned us into monsters. Vex looked at his friend seriously. We're fighting to preserve humanity, Drake. Not just as a species but as an idea. The moment we start targeting innocents we lose that idea. But he could see the doubt in Drake's eyes. The augmentation process changed more than just bodies. It changed perspectives, dulled empathy, enhanced aggression. They were becoming the weapons they needed to be. The question was whether they could remain human while doing so. The destruction of the Purge fleet sent shockwaves through the Zalvan Empire and beyond. For the first time in millennia, other species began to wonder, if the humans could resist, could they? Rebellions flared across 3 sectors. The Vresh, a species subjugated 2 centuries earlier, rose up against their Zalvan overseers. The Kalmani, who had lost their homeworld 50 years ago, began coordinated attacks on supply lines. The Ashborn had inadvertently started something larger than themselves. High Commander Zelthrax watched his empire begin to crack. The humans are a cancer, he declared to what remained of his council. By refusing to die quietly, they have infected the other species with hope. This is precisely why we must eliminate them completely. But the political will for another major military action against humanity was faltering. The Purge fleet's destruction had cost resources the Empire could not easily replace. The industrial output of Velkur Prime was still crippled. Other subjugated species were tying up military assets that would have been used against the Ashborn. Perhaps, Council Member Thrax suggested carefully, we should consider negotiation. The chamber went silent. Negotiation with prey species was not done. It set dangerous precedents. Negotiation implies equality, Zelthrax said coldly. The humans are not our equals. They are vermin that have proven surprisingly difficult to exterminate. Then what do you propose? We have deployed conventional forces. We have deployed specialized elimination units. We have deployed a purge fleet. All have failed. At what point do we acknowledge that continuing this war is bleeding resources we need elsewhere? Zelthrax had no good answer. The humans had proven something the Empire had never had to contend with, that a sufficiently motivated enemy with nothing to lose was almost impossible to fully defeat. Among the Ashborn, the victory's aftermath was creating its own crisis. The faction Drake had warned about was growing bolder, calling themselves the Ember Legion. They argued that the Ashborn were being too restrained, too focused on military targets. We should make them afraid, their leader, a woman named Kara Rin, declared at a general assembly. Not just their military but every Zalvan everywhere. They should wake up each day wondering if today is the day humans come for them. You're talking about terrorism, Vex said flatly. Targeting civilians. I'm talking about total war, Kara countered. They didn't limit themselves to military targets when they burned Earth. They killed everyone. Why should we be more merciful than they were? The assembly was divided. Many had lost everything to the Zalvan and wanted revenge without limits. Others, like Vex, still clung to the idea that there were lines that should not be crossed. Lyssa Thorne, attending via hologram from the refugee colonies, spoke up. If you cross that line you become exactly what they believed humans were. Savage, cruel, worthy only of extinction. You prove them right. They already killed us, someone shouted from the crowd. They don't get to judge us anymore. The argument raged for hours, eventually ending with no consensus. The Ashborn, forged in fire and united by survival, were beginning to fracture over the question of what survival was worth. Vex called an emergency meeting with his core leadership team. Sarah, Drake, and the other original members who had been with him since Pyre's reach. We're losing control of the narrative, Sarah said bluntly. The anger is justified, but if the Ember Legion goes rogue and starts attacking civilians, it will turn every neutral species against us. We'll go from freedom fighters to terrorists in the eyes of the galaxy. Can we stop them? Drake asked. Not without force, Vex said. And I'm not starting a civil war among humans while we're already fighting for our existence. Then we need to give them a better target, Sarah suggested. Something that channels their rage productively. She pulled up a star chart highlighting a system deep in the core of Zalvan space. This is Zalvar, their capital world. Home to 5 billion Zalvan, including their imperial court. It's the most heavily defended location in the Empire. You want to attack their capital? Drake said incredulously. That's impossible. So was destroying a purge fleet, Sarah countered. And we did it. If we can strike at Zalvar, if we can prove that nowhere is safe for them, we achieve the Ember Legion's goal without targeting civilians. We make the Empire afraid without becoming monsters. Vex studied the data. Zalvar was protected by 7 orbital defense platforms, each larger than Pyre's reach had been. Its surface bristled with anti-ship weapons. A permanent fleet of 1,000 warships guarded the system. It would take everything we have, he said slowly. And even then the casualties would be catastrophic. But it would end the debate, Sarah pressed. It would give everyone a purpose beyond revenge. And it might just break the Zalvan's will to continue this war. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. But the alternative was watching the Ashborn tear themselves apart from within. Put it to a vote, Vex decided. All Ashborn including the Ember Legion. We commit to Zalvar or we find another way. But we do it together. The vote was not unanimous but it was decisive. 73% supported the operation. The Ember Legion agreed to delay any civilian-targeted operations if the strike on Zalvar proceeded. Preparation took 4 months. The Ashborn called in every favor, every resource, every piece of intelligence they had gathered. They made contact with the rebel species, coordinating diversionary attacks that would draw Zalvan forces away from the capital. They also did something unprecedented. They reached out to other human survivors, the baseline communities that had never joined the Ashborn. Lyssa Thorne traveled to dozens of hidden colonies making the case. This is not about revenge, she told them. This is about ending the war before we lose ourselves in it. If we succeed, we force the Zalvan to negotiate. If we fail, at least we fail trying to strike at the heart of our enemy rather than at innocence. Not everyone was convinced, but enough volunteered that the Ashborn gained another 3,000 fighters, unaugmented but determined. The mixing of augmented and baseline humans created tensions. The Ashborn's enhanced capabilities made the normal humans feel inadequate. The baseline humans' presence reminded the Ashborn of what they had given up. But they trained together, planned together, and slowly learned to fight together. The augmented provided the enhanced combat capabilities. The baseline provided the human perspective that kept them grounded. Vex found himself working closely with a baseline commander named Jax Torin, a former military officer from Mars who had lost his entire family in the initial invasion. "You know," Jax said one day during tactical planning, "I used to think you Ashborn were crazy, mutilating yourselves in pursuit of revenge. And now I think you were desperate. There's a difference." Jax studied the holographic map of Zalvar. "But I also think Lissa is right. You can't let the augmentation change who you are inside. The Zalvan are wrong about a lot of things, but they're right about one thing. When you change too much, you stop being what you were." "We had to change to survive," Vex said. "No, you had to change to fight. Survival could have meant hiding, running, preserving what humanity was even in small numbers." Jax met his eyes. Fighting back was a choice. An understandable one, maybe even the right one, but still a choice. Don't let that choice erase everything else. The words struck deeper than Vex wanted to admit. Had they changed too much? Were they still fighting for humanity or just for revenge? He didn't have time to wrestle with the question. The operation was launching in 3 days. Commander Viwarnen, meanwhile, had been assigned to Zalvar's defense after her failure with the Purge fleet. It was a demotion disguised as an important posting, and she knew it. But it also gave her a perspective on the capital's vulnerabilities. She studied the defense grid obsessively, looking for weaknesses the humans might exploit. Because she was certain they were coming. The Ashborn had proven to be predictable in only one way: they went for targets that should be impossible. "Increase patrols in the outer system," she commanded. "I want sensor probes deployed in a 3-dimensional net. If anything larger than an asteroid enters this system, I want to know about it instantly." Her subordinates executed the orders, but she could see the skepticism on their faces. Zalvar had never been attacked in 5,000 years. The idea that humans could threaten it seemed absurd. But Viwarnen had seen what the Ashborn could do. She knew better than to underestimate them. On the day of the operation, Vex stood before the assembled strike force. 10,000 Ashborn and baseline human volunteers, spread across 200 ships. It was everything they had. If this failed, humanity's resistance would be effectively broken. "Today we prove that humanity's spirit cannot be killed," he said, his voice carrying across every ship via comm link. "The Zalvan came to our worlds thinking we would break. They burned Earth thinking we would fade away. They were wrong. We are here because we refuse to accept extinction. We are here because our dead deserve to be avenged. We are here because the future of humanity depends on what we do in the next few hours. Some of you are Ashborn, enhanced and augmented. Some of you are baseline, unmodified but unbreakable. Today we fight together. Today we are simply human. And we will show the galaxy what that means." The fleet jumped to FTL, heading toward Zalvar. Toward the heart of the empire that had tried to erase them. Toward destiny one way or another. The armada emerged from FTL at the edge of the Zalvar system, and for a moment, both sides simply stared at each other across the void. The Zalvan had never seen a human fleet of this size. The humans had never seen defenses this formidable. "All ships engage," Vex commanded. The battle began. Commander Viwarnen watched the sensor displays light up with hostile contacts. 200 ships, her tactical officer reported. Multiple classes, coordinated attack pattern. "They actually came," Viwarnen breathed. Part of her had hoped they wouldn't, that humanity would choose survival over this suicidal assault. "Deploy the reserve fleet. All defense platforms to maximum alert. And someone tell High Commander Zelthrax that his worst nightmare has arrived." The Zalvan response was overwhelming. 3 orbital defense platforms began firing, their weapons capable of vaporizing capital ships. The garrison fleet moved to intercept, outnumbering the human forces 5-1. But the humans didn't fight like a conventional fleet. They scattered, breaking into dozens of smaller groups, each with its own objective. Some targeted the defense platforms. Others engaged the garrison fleet. A third group, led by Vex himself, made a direct burn for the planet. "They're trying to reach the surface," Viwarnen's tactical officer said. "Should we pursue?" "No. They know they can't hold the planet. This is a statement, not an invasion." Viwarnen studied the chaotic battle unfolding. "They're trying to prove they can reach anywhere, even here. Focus fire on the groups attacking our platforms. We can't let them disable our heavy weapons. But the Ashborn had learned from every previous engagement. They used the debris from destroyed ships as cover, calculated attack runs that exploited gaps in the overlapping fire zones, and sacrificed themselves with brutal efficiency to accomplish objectives. Drake led a strike team against Platform Alpha, his ship weaving through defensive fire that would have killed him a dozen times over if his enhanced reflexes weren't guiding every move. They lost 3 ships in the approach, but the survivors reached the platform's docking bay and breached it. Inside, Zalvan's security forces met them with overwhelming firepower. But the Ashborn were no longer fragile humans. They were enhanced warriors who had been fighting for survival for over a year. The battle was vicious and close quarters, the kind of fighting where augmented strength and speed made all the difference. Drake personally planted the charges on the platform's reactor core. 15 minutes to detonation, he reported. Pulling out. They fought their way back to their ships, losing half the team in the process. But as they pulled away, Platform Alpha exploded in a fireball that lit up the entire system. Sarah's group was targeting the garrison fleet's command ship, a massive dreadnought called the Eternal Watch. She had calculated that destroying it would create chaos in the Zalvan tactical network, buying precious time. Multiple intercept vectors, her co-pilot warned. We're not going to make it. Yes, we are, Sarah said calmly, her enhanced neural processors calculating trajectories impossible for baseline humans to perceive. She piloted their ship through a gap in the defensive fire that existed for exactly 1.3 seconds, threading the needle within human precision. They crashed into the Eternal Watch's hangar bay, tearing through the internal structure. Sarah's team poured out, fighting through corridors that were never meant to be battlefields. They reached the bridge in 7 minutes, and Sarah personally uploaded a virus into the ship's command network before they retreated. The virus didn't destroy the ship. It did something worse. It introduced a 3-second delay into every command. In fleet combat, 3 seconds was an eternity. The Eternal Watch became a liability, broadcasting conflicting orders and creating confusion throughout the Zalvan formation. And Vex, leading the surface strike, broke through the orbital defenses through sheer audacity and the sacrifice of 30 ships that flew directly into the defensive fire to create a gap. His ship screamed through Zalvar's atmosphere, followed by 20 others. They were burning too hot, coming in too fast, but they made it to the surface. They landed in the heart of the Imperial District, within sight of the palace itself. The Ashborn poured out, ready to fight. But Vex had no intention of attacking civilians or trying to hold territory. Instead, he activated a pre-recorded message and began broadcasting it across every frequency, every screen, every communication device on the planet. His image appeared everywhere. On the holographic displays in the palace. On personal devices. In public squares. People of Zalvar, Vex said in flawless Zalvan language, another benefit of his augmentation. I am Captain Vex Corrin of humanity. We are here to deliver a message. Your empire came to our worlds and killed billions of innocents. You burned our homeworld thinking we would disappear quietly into extinction. But we are still here. We have reached your capital, penetrated your defenses, and touched your world. We could kill you. We could rain fire on your cities as you did to ours. We could make you feel the terror you inflicted upon us. He paused. But we will not. Because we are not you. We do not murder civilians. We do not target the helpless. This demonstration is to prove one thing. You cannot destroy us. You can hurt us, kill many of us, but you cannot erase humanity from this galaxy. We are survivors. We adapt. We overcome. This war ends when you agree to let us exist. Not as subjects. Not as cattle. As equals. Withdraw from human space. Allow the remnants of our species to rebuild. Do this and we will cease all hostile actions. Refuse and we will continue this war until one of our species is extinct. And based on what you've seen today, ask yourselves which species is more likely to survive. The message ended. Across Zalvar, billions of Zalvan watched in shock. The humans were here. On their capital world. They could have inflicted massive casualties, but they chose not to. It was, in its own way, more terrifying than if they had attacked. It meant the humans were rational, controlled, and fighting for a specific purpose rather than mindless revenge. High Commander Zelthrax watched the message from his palace, his claws digging into the armrests of his throne. Around him, his advisors were in chaos, shouting about security failures and demanding immediate retaliation. But Zelthrax understood what Vex had done. The human had made this personal but also offered a way out. He had demonstrated power while showing restraint. He had proven that humanity could reach anywhere while offering peace. It was masterful psychology. And it was working. "Order all forces to cease fire," Zelthrax commanded. "High Commander?" His advisors stared at him. "The humans have made their point. If we continue to fight them here on Zalvar, we risk massive civilian casualties in our own capital. And even if we kill these attackers, the damage to our prestige is already done." He stood slowly. "Open a communication channel. I will speak with this Captain Corrin." Back in the Imperial District, Vex received the incoming communication. His team was surrounded by Zalvan forces, but nobody was shooting. Everyone was waiting. "This is High Commander Zelthrax. Captain Corrin, I acknowledge the effectiveness of your demonstration. You have proven that this war cannot be won through conventional means." "Then end it," Vex said simply. "Recognize human sovereignty. Let us rebuild in peace." "And what of the other species? The rebellions your actions have inspired?" "That's between you and them. Humanity wants only what you took from us, the right to exist." Zelthrax was quiet for a long moment. "You understand that I cannot simply decree peace. The Council must agree. The Empire has procedures." "Then start the procedures. We will withdraw from Zalvar as a gesture of good faith. But if you betray this opportunity, if you attempt to resume the genocide, we will return. And next time, we will not be so merciful." The communication ended. Vex gave the order to withdraw. The Ashborn retreated to their ships, loaded up and burned for orbit. The Zalvan forces let them go, too stunned by the day's events to react. They had lost over 60 ships in the operation, over 3,000 people. The casualty rate was devastating. But they had achieved something impossible. They had struck the Zalvan capital and lived to tell about it. More importantly, they had forced negotiations. Commander Viwarinen watched the human ships escape, making no move to pursue. "They could have done so much worse," she said quietly. "Commander?" her tactical officer asked. "If I had reached their capital, if I had penetrated their defenses as they just did ours, I would have been ordered to inflict maximum casualties. To break their will through terror." She looked at the retreating ships. "But they chose restraint. They made their point without unnecessary death. That takes a kind of strength we don't possess." On the flagship returning to what remained of the human fleet, Vex collapsed into his command chair, exhausted. Sarah sat beside him, equally drained. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "We survived it," Vex corrected. "Whether we accomplished anything remains to be seen." But in his heart, he felt something he hadn't felt since the fall of Earth: hope. The negotiations took 3 months. The Zalvan Empire was not accustomed to treating with what they considered lesser species, and every term had to be debated, every concession fought for. Vex represented humanity, supported by a council that included Sarah, Jax Torin, and even Lissa Thorne. Commander Viwarinen represented the Zalvan, her presence a sign of Zelthrax's grudging respect for the humans who had humiliated his empire. The talks were held on a neutral space station operated by the Vresh, who had their own reasons to see the Zalvan's power checked. Every session was tense, with both sides carrying the weight of too many deaths. "You ask for complete sovereignty over your former territories," Viwarinen said during one particularly contentious session. "But those worlds were cleansed. They are uninhabitable." "Then we'll make them habitable again," Vex replied. "We rebuilt ourselves from 12,000 refugees to a force capable of challenging your empire. We can rebuild our worlds. The resources required will be provided by you," Lissa interrupted, "as reparations for the genocide you attempted." The Zalvan delegation reacted with outrage, but Viwarinen raised a hand to silence them. "You cannot expect us to finance the rebuilding of an enemy." "Enemy?" Jax Torin leaned forward. "You're the ones who attacked us. We were no threat to your empire. We had never even entered your space. You came to our worlds and murdered billions because you saw us as inferior. Now you're surprised that we demand compensation?" The arguments continued, day after day. But slowly progress was made. The Zalvan agreed to withdraw from all formerly human space. They agreed to provide technological assistance in terraforming and reconstruction. They agreed to a demilitarized zone between their territory and human territory. In exchange, humanity agreed to cease all military operations against Zalvan assets. They agreed to share intelligence on the rebel species, though notably they did not agree to help suppress the rebellions. And they agreed to limit their military expansion for 50 years. "You are still augmented," Viwarinen said to Vex during a private conversation between sessions. "You're Ashborn. What happens when this generation passes? Will you continue to create more enhanced humans?" "That's up to us to decide," Vex said. Not you. I ask because the Empire fears what you might become. You've proven that even a small population of augmented humans is incredibly dangerous. If you expand, if you modify yourselves further, then you'll have an excuse to try genocide again? Vex's voice was cold. Let me make something clear, Commander. The Ashborn exist because you forced us to evolve or die. We chose evolution. But we're still human. We still remember what was taken from us. And if the Zalvan ever threaten humanity again, we won't negotiate. We won't show restraint. We will end your empire no matter the cost. Bjorn met his gaze. I believe you. That's why I'm arguing for peace. The High Commander thinks this is a temporary setback. I think it's the beginning of the end if we don't change our ways. Your empire has ruled for millennia through force. That's not going to change easily. No, Voronin agreed. But you've proven that force alone is not enough. That's a lesson we needed to learn, even if it cost us dearly. The treaty was finally signed on a date humanity would remember, the first anniversary of Earth's fall. It seemed fitting that from the ashes of their homeworld, a new beginning would rise. But the Ashborn faced their own reckoning. Now that the war was over, now that survival was no longer the only goal, they had to decide what they would become. The Ember Legion, disappointed that the war ended before they could take more extreme actions, proposed that the Ashborn should become humanity's permanent military caste. Enhanced soldiers protecting baseline humans who would rebuild civilization. That's a recipe for conflict, Lissa argued during the debate. You'll create a two-tiered society. Eventually the augmented will see themselves as superior. History is full of examples of how that ends. Or the baseline humans will fear and resent us, Kara Rin countered. We sacrificed our humanity to save the species. Now you want us to just integrate back into society as if nothing changed. Vex listened to both sides, understanding the truth in each argument. The augmentation had changed them fundamentally and irreversibly. But that didn't mean they had to be separate from the rest of humanity. We offer a choice, he said finally. Any Ashborn who wants to continue as a soldier can do so. We'll establish a military force to protect human space. But any Ashborn who wants to reintegrate into civilian life should be supported in doing so. We'll provide medical assistance, psychological counseling, whatever is needed. And the augmentation technology? Someone asked. Do we continue to offer it? This was the hardest question. The augmentation had saved them, but it had also cost them something intangible. Could they in good conscience offer it to future generations? We seal the technology for now, Vex decided. Lock it away with safeguards. If humanity ever faces an existential threat again, it will be there. But we don't continue augmenting people in peacetime. Let the baseline humans rebuild. Let them grow. Let them be human without the weight of necessary monstrosity. The decision was controversial, but it held. The Ashborn began the slow process of transitioning from a warrior culture back to something more balanced. Vex himself chose to remain in the military, helping to establish the new human defense force. But he stepped down from supreme command, recognizing that the skills that made him effective in war were not the skills needed in peace. Sarah took a different path, joining the terraforming efforts on Earth. The homeworld was poisoned, yes, but not beyond redemption. It would take decades, maybe centuries, but she was determined to see humanity's birthplace live again. Drake became an ambassador to the Vresh and other species, using his unique perspective to build alliances that would ensure humanity was never isolated and vulnerable again. And Lissa Thorne wrote. She documented everything: the fall of Earth, the creation of the Ashborn, the war, the negotiations. She wrote so that future generations would understand what had been sacrificed and what had been preserved. 5 years after the treaty, Vex stood on the observation deck of a station orbiting Earth. Below, the planet was still scarred, still recovering. But patches of green were appearing. Life was returning. Sarah joined him, no longer wearing military gear but civilian clothes. Her augmentation were still there, still marking her as Ashborn, but she carried them differently now. I heard the council is considering lifting the ban on augmentation, she said. For medical purposes only, Vex replied. Not military. Some people want enhancements to survive in hostile environments, to repair injuries that would be untreatable otherwise. That's different from creating soldiers. Is it though? Slippery slope and all that. Maybe. But we can't make decisions out of fear. We tried to preserve humanity by becoming something else. Now we have to trust that future generations will make their own choices wisely. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Earth slowly heal. Do you regret it? Sarah asked quietly. The augmentation. What we became. Vex thought about the question seriously. He thought about the pain of the transformation, the people who hadn't survived it, the way it had changed how he experienced the world. He thought about the moral compromises, the deaths he'd ordered, the burden of command. No, he said finally. We did what we had to do. The Ashborn saved humanity when nothing else could. But I'm glad we're transitioning away from it now. War should never be permanent. Soldiers should never be a separate species. What will you do when the defense force is fully established and you're no longer needed? I don't know. Learn to be human again, I suppose. Or learn to be whatever I am now. He smiled slightly. Maybe I'll help with the terraforming. I hear you're always looking for volunteers. Always, Sarah confirmed. It's slow work, tedious, not at all like fighting a war. Good. I think I've had enough war for a lifetime. Across human space, similar conversations were happening. The Ashborn were slowly integrating back into human society, carrying their augmentations and their trauma but also their determination to build something better. Not everyone succeeded. Some Ashborn couldn't adapt to peace, unable to function without the clarity of combat. Suicide rates among veterans were tragically high. The psychological cost of what they had become and what they had done weighed heavily. Support networks were established. Therapy programs. Communities where Ashborn could live together and understand each other's struggles. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. 10 years after the treaty, Earth's first restored city opened. New Hope, built on the ruins of what had been Beijing. 500,000 people moved there, a mix of baseline humans and Ashborn, working together to rebuild. Vex attended the opening ceremony. He was older now, his augmented body aging differently than baseline humans, but the gray in his hair was real enough. He stood beside Lissa Thorne, who had become one of humanity's most respected historians. You did it, Lissa said as they watched children play in the streets below. Children who had been born after the war, who knew of it only through stories. You saved us. We survived, Vex corrected. There's a difference. Is there? You fought back when surrender seemed inevitable. You transformed yourselves when evolution seemed impossible. You struck at the heart of an empire that thought itself invincible. That's more than survival. That's triumph. It doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like we barely made it. That's because you're thinking about what was lost. Look at what remains. Lissa gestured to the city spreading below them. 2 billion humans alive today. More being born every year. Earth recovering. Treaties signed. Alliances formed. We're not what we were, but we're still here. Still human. Still reaching for the stars. Vex watched a group of children playing, and among them he noticed one with the telltale signs of augmentation. Enhanced reflexes making her slightly faster, more coordinated. A medical augmentation, the kind now legal. She was laughing, playing, being a child despite her enhancements. Maybe that's what it means, he said quietly. To have a birthright of ashes. Not that we rose from destruction, but that we carry it with us. That we remember what was lost while still building something new. Poetic, Lissa said with a slight smile. I might use that. You're welcome to it. 20 years after the treaty, humanity had spread across 37 worlds, including 12 that had been cleansed by the Zalvan and were now slowly recovering. The population had grown to 5 billion. The scars remained, but life continued. The Zalvan Empire, meanwhile, had entered a period of reform. The near defeat by humanity had shaken their confidence in their superiority. Other species had negotiated more favorable terms. The Empire was still powerful, still vast, but no longer unchallenged. Commander Viwarnin, now High Commander after Zelthrax's retirement, visited Earth for the first time. She met with Vex, both of them older now but still recognizable as the warriors they had been. Your world recovers well, Viwarnin observed as they walked through New Hope's Central Park. It'll take another century before it's fully restored, Vex replied. But we're patient. I came to apologize, Viwarnin said abruptly. Personally, not just politically. What we did to your species was wrong. I knew it was wrong even as we did it, but I followed orders because that's what we do. That's what we've always done. Vex stopped walking, looking at her. Why tell me this now? Because I'm old. Because I want to die with at least one honest conversation about what happened. Viwarnin's alien features were difficult to read, but her voice carried genuine regret. Your species taught mine something we had forgotten. That strength alone is not enough. That survival requires more than just power. You fought us with courage we didn't expect from a supposedly inferior species. You showed mercy when you could have taken revenge. You were everything we were not. We were desperate, Vex said. Desperation makes people capable of extraordinary things. Then may my people never become so desperate that we must learn the lessons you learned. You are an intern to leave, then paused. Captain Corin, Vex, thank you for teaching us that lesson before it was too late. For both our species. She left, and Vex stood alone in the park, thinking about the strange paths that led from war to peace, from hatred to understanding. 30 years after the treaty, Vex retired from the Defense Force. He was 70 now, his augmented body finally beginning to show its age. He moved to Earth to a small house near New Hope, and began writing his own memoir. Sarah visited often, her hair white but her augmented vitality still keeping her active. They would sit on his porch, drinking tea that was grown in Earth's recovering soil, and talk about old times. Do you think we made the right choices? Sarah asked one evening as the sun set over landscape that was slowly returning to life. Which choices? We made thousands. All of them. Becoming Ashborn. Fighting instead of hiding. Showing mercy at Zalvar. Vex was quiet for a long time. I think we made the only choices we could make and still live with ourselves. Whether they were right, history will judge that. And if history judges us harshly? Then at least we'll have given humanity a future to have historians in the first place. 40 years after the treaty, Vex died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82. His augmented body had lasted longer than anyone expected, but in the end, even enhanced humans were mortal. His funeral was attended by thousands. Ashborn veterans, baseline humans, even a delegation from the Zalvan Empire. He was buried on Earth, in soil he had helped recover, under skies he had helped clear. Sarah gave the eulogy. She was 94 now, the oldest surviving Ashborn, but her voice was still strong. Vex Corin was a soldier, a leader, and a symbol of humanity's refusal to surrender, she said. But more than that, he was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, we remained human. He could have chosen genocide. He could have become the monster the Zalvan believed us to be. Instead, he chose to fight for survival, not revenge. To strike at military targets, not civilians. To show mercy when the opportunity arose. The Ashborn exist because of choices made by people like Vex. We are their birthright of ashes, born from destruction, shaped by necessity, but still holding on to the core of what makes us human. We remember the billions who died. We carry their memory. But we also build for the billions yet to be born. Vex once told me that he didn't know if we made the right choices. But I know this, because of him, because of all the Ashborn, because of every human who refused to give up, we have the luxury of asking that question. We survived. We endured. We evolved. And we remained human through it all. That is his legacy. That is our birthright. The funeral ended and people slowly dispersed, returning to lives that Vex had helped make possible. The Ashborn veterans gathered separately, acknowledging the passing of the man who had led them through the darkest chapter of human history. And on Earth, under skies that were finally clear again, life continued. Children played. Cities grew. Humanity, scarred but unbroken, reached once more for the stars. The Zalvan Empire still existed, still powerful but humbled. The rebel species had won their own freedoms, inspired by humanity's example. The galaxy was more diverse, more chaotic, but also more free than it had been in millennia. And somewhere in the archives, in the histories being written, in the stories being told, the tale of the Ashborn endured. Of how humanity faced extinction and refused to accept it. Of how ordinary people became extraordinary warriors. Of how even in the depths of despair, hope survived. Because that was humanity's true strength, its real birthright. Not the ashes from which they rose, but the determination to rise at all. To adapt, to survive, to fight when fighting seemed impossible, and to show mercy when revenge would have been easier. The Ashborn had been humanity's weapon against extinction. But they had also been its conscience, its reminder that monsters are not born but made, and that the choice to remain human exists even when everything else is stripped away. 50 years after the treaty, the last of the original Ashborn passed away. Their augmentations had granted them extended lifespans, but not immortality. Their descendants, some augmented for medical reasons, most baseline human, carried on the legacy. Earth was fully recovered now. 10 billion humans lived across 49 worlds. The Human Defense Force protected their space with vigilance but not aggression. Relations with the Zalvan were stable if not warm. Other species saw humanity as proof that determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. And in schools across human space, children learned about the fall, about the Ashborn, about the war that had nearly ended their species. They learned the names, Vex Corin, Sarah Vaughn, Drake Helm, Lissa Thorne. They learned about the choices made, the sacrifices given, the price of survival. But most importantly, they learned that humanity's greatest strength was not its technology or its augmentations or its military might. It was its refusal to surrender, its ability to adapt, its determination to remain human even when pushed to the edge of becoming something else. That was the true birthright of ashes, not the destruction that had nearly ended them, but the strength they had discovered in surviving it. Not the monster they could have become, but the humanity they had preserved despite everything. And as humanity spread across the stars, building new worlds and new futures, they carried that lesson with them. They remembered the ashes from which they had risen. They honored those who had fought to ensure they could rise at all. But they also looked forward, to the tomorrow that the Ashborn had bought with their sacrifice. To the future that would justify all the pain and loss and transformation. They were humanity. Scarred, changed, enhanced in some cases and baseline in others, but united by a shared history and a shared determination to never again face extinction without fighting back with everything they had. The galaxy had tried to erase them and failed. And in that failure, humanity had proven something fundamental, that they were not just survivors, but survivors who would never forget what survival cost. That was their birthright. That was their legacy. That was the story that would echo across the stars for millennia to come.